Thank you very much. I think that was an incredible talk by Andrew. It was the best I've ever heard. I think everybody should stand up and move a little bit, like put your arms up, just move some blood, punch somebody, punch the AER a few times, because we got to do way more punching by way more people. And I'd like to do something really risky. Today, I'm going to dedicate this talk to my nephew, Derek Ernst, who killed himself just before Christmas in 2009. Many people think because of my work on this lawsuit. He's a big part of this story, but he's not in it. Thank you. So, let's start. To what extent does abuse of power help this industry in Canada? You've already heard about Andrew's book. I'm not going to talk to you about my entire story. I'm just presenting you a small part of it. If you want more, read Slickwater. And it only goes up to a part of the story as well, because, of course, the story continues. He won quite a few awards with this book and tells you a lot more. The industry has known for decades not only that their wells and infrastructure are leaking methane, but that it's a life-threatening leak all over every field that they operate in. It has killed people for decades, and it has injured people for decades, and ruined homes. There's even a hospital, like a medical center in Pennsylvania that was shut down because of industries leaking methane into the center because of fracking affecting an old wellbore. I'll start with some history. In 1986, the historic water well record on my water well on file with the regulator, with Alberta Environment. The yellow at the bottom says gas present, no. I blew that up for you. Can you read that? It's very important data. And at the time that the brute force fracking began in Alberta, less than 1% of the water wells had methane in them. Not even 0.2%. Try to remember that. Natural gas does happen in water wells naturally. It normally doesn't change dramatically. It's usually at very low levels. Dr. Carlos Mullenbach's the king of isotopic fingerprinting at the University of Alberta. He's done a lot of research on this. They call him the king of isotopic fingerprinting. He says that these natural levels of methane in water, the low levels, don't produce ethane. It's important to remember. And that study I showed you the cover of in the 90s by the Canadian Association of Petroleum Producers, CAP, our biggest oil and gas lobby group in Canada, they reported also most levels of natural methane in water are very low and below 1 milligram per liter. Try to remember that number. There's going to be an exam after. Risk of explosion at 1. And the interesting thing about this is I've done a lot of research on this gas migration. Every time there's an explosion and people are killed by industries leaking gas, migrating into a home or into businesses or stores, the regulators up the level. It went from below 1 to 3 in Pennsylvania to 7, and now at 28. And that report Andrew talked to you about Alberta Health, they've put it up to 28. We have this report in Alberta saying, oh, 1 milligram is risk for explosion in your water. If that water passes a confined space like a water heater or a tightly closed room. There was a regulator study, came out in 2006. They tested water wells in coal. Most had no methane or ethane. And the few that did were probably from leaking energy wells. And Dr. Bernard Meyer, he also does isotopic fingerprinting at the University of Calgary. He has said free gas is not present in water wells, naturally. Our water wells that are contaminated also have free gas. We looked at, for my lawsuit, 2,300 water well records, the historic records, around 50 square kilometers around my community. Look at that, almost the same percentage, 0.17. The CAP study was 0.18, or the study, in the CAP study prior to all the fracking was 0.18. Very low levels of water wells naturally had methane in them in Alberta. I bought my property in 1998. I leave my home to regain my health and my energy. I get really sick when I'm home. And look at how beautiful it is there. I bought this place to escape humanity and to leave the world because I was so tired of the world. How we just harm each other. That's all we do, even best friends and family. And I never could understand why I picked Rosebud. But of course, you'll understand why I ended up there. But I can't stay there. I have to stay there to do the lawsuit. But I get really sick. And this is my home. My home. Your home. Where we live, we raise our children, we love our livestock. Anne Craft has had to leave her home by Pinoca. Terrible contamination from fracking. She has had to let go all her beloved animals. The Canadian Ministers of Environment across the country held a very important workshop in 2002, and they said, oh, this unconventional drilling, big problem. It's going to cause big impacts. We have to do baseline studies and monitor. Are they doing this anywhere in Canada? Show of hands. Nowhere. Instead, this here is the well that EnCana fracked Rosebud's drinking water aquifers on. Rosebud's down here in the valley. You saw that diagram Andrew showed you about the fracking into the valleys. Well, EnCana began secretly fracking our drinking water aquifers. Andrew showed you evidence of experts saying, we're worried the fracks will come from deep down and migrate into water, which they have done. That EPA report on the Parson well, that was on deep fracking that migrated up into his shallow water well. At Rosebud, we had the company secretly frack right into our water. Did you ever hear that in the news here? So they intentionally perfed and fracked numerous times into our aquifers on a number of wells, 200 wells. You saw the map Andrew showed around my community in the freshwater zones. I'm very nervous. I don't like public speaking. I'm going to take a drink of water. It's not my water. Thank you. Regulators helped EnCana keep this secret. More and more of our water wells became dangerously contaminated. To this day, even with my lawsuit, the rules of court are clear. I am to receive all the chemical information injected. Trade secrets are not allowed in lawsuits. I cannot get any of the chemicals injected into the drinking water aquifers or the other chemicals used to try to solve the problems EnCana created. My fracked life actually began with a lot of noise. One of the impacts I find the most difficult to live with is the compressor noise. It's not only a noise to your brain and your ears, but you feel it in your sternum. When I walked out here and there were all kinds of cars coming, I walked out of my vehicle and I went, oh, peace. Wow, even with the highway. It's a really invasive, harmful noise. But lucky for me, my neighbor came to me in 2003 and he said, Jess, my water well went bad after some EnCana wells. They want to do more closer to your place. You better get your well tested. Thankfully, he warmed me because I would have no lawsuit. I have a test by EnCana. At that time, EnCana willingly tested water wells up to a mile away from their fracks, and even deep fracked wells. The water tester did not report visible gas, said the water appearance was clear. Here's the actual records. Water appearance clear. This is the EnCana well, the photo you saw before, where they fracked right into our drinking water aquifers. It's a highly invasive process. They don't just frack once. 24 zones, of which the top 6, 7 were in our drinking water aquifers. They had problems. They created problems. Water wells started to go bad. What did EnCana do? They shut the well up really quickly to prevent data from being collected on it. They did this intentionally. This was not a mistake. Why? Why do I know this? Because I search for data. This is the water well database in Alberta. These are the intentional perforations EnCana put into their well that they said on this data, we're going to frack for coal bed methane. There's the diagram Andrew showed you. My water well's over here. These are the wells that went bad first. And there's two aquifers that EnCana actually fracked. On top of that, the landman comes along. The impacts are horrific with fracking, as you've seen from Andrew's talk. They have to deregulate everything. They do not want to get individual permits for all the wells, so they conned people in my community to sign blanket approval documents. I caught them at this. I went public with it. I exposed them. And then I found out EnCana was not just lying to me. I was working for them up north doing consultation, and I find out they're lying to my community. and playing dirty tricks from the 50s and 60s. So I resigned in writing. This created a massive storm because nobody had ever resigned from EnCana before, and the manager there that was on my project was trying like mad to figure out a way to fire me after I had already resigned. But the companies, that wasn't good enough, so what did they do? The regulators and companies went to the National Energy Board and demanded blanket approval. 10 years later, this was put into place in Fox Creek, Alberta, which is now province-wide. Mark Taylor was the manager for EnCana at the time of these law violations. He is now on the executive at the AER. This is from the AER's website. Mark Taylor, executive. He looked us in the eye like today. I forced community meetings because EnCana refused to consult with us. And he told us, we will never frack your drinking water supply. Don't worry. No. We're only going to be way deep to prevent gas from migrating into your water. Then they promised a little bit of money to a part of the community to divide and conquer. They didn't even give the money. They waited 6 years. Successfully silenced the community. Our water tower blew up in an explosion from an accumulation of gases. Seriously injured our water manager. This is an Australian cartoon. I love this cartoon because there's like intercontinental connection here. Here we have the field supervisor. Here we have Mark Taylor. You can tell by his nose, right? And here we have the engineer who's taking notes. And they're going to prove that fracking for CBM does not affect the water table. And there goes the water tower, boom, just like at Rosebud. And industry will say, oh, we don't have to frack CBM, but they have to frack CBM much more than other formations. My water dramatically changed. Whistling taps, blowing gas, so much gas coming out of my taps, you could feel it blowing out of them. Painful cracks on my hands from doing dishes. I had not changed any of my soaps or shampoos, but they suddenly, all of them stopped making suds. There was so much gas in my water, but I didn't know, because I believed the lies, that it was spurting out of bathtub and toilet. If I had visitors and more than a few people used the toilet in a row, you'd sit on a wet toilet seat. And I'd look at the ceiling going, it's not raining, it's a day like today. Where's this coming from? And it wasn't until I poured fresh water for my dogs one day, all this clouds of white smoke came off it, and they backed away in revulsion. And it hit me in my guts. I went, they're lying. The water's bad. And then I really started to research. It's my water. It's not photoshopped. Instead of regulating the law-violating company, the AER regulated me. They lied, they deregulated to match EnCana's noncompliance. I caught them at it. I asked questions. They tried to silence me into the usual obedient Alberta silence. Everybody wants to support this industry, for sure. Your children have done very well in this industry. But do people really want their sons and daughters to have jobs that are harming people, causing gag orders in settlements, and making families abandon their homes, like Anne Craft? She lost everything, and she's very sick. They judge me a criminal in writing. They're not very smart, our regulator. I'll have you that. They're not. They think they are, but they're not. Anyone can do what I do. You just need persistence and read a lot. Without evidence, no due process, no trial, no hearing. Even murderers are given due process in this country. They are innocent until proven guilty in a court of law. Not me with the regulator. They violate my charter rights. They interrogate me 6 months later. Rick McKee, the lawyer, big bully, nasty guy, tried to get me. They were trying to fabricate the evidence they needed to prove me a criminal 6 months after the fact. Nasty interrogation. I was terrified. I was shaking the whole time. And I glared at Rick McKee and said, the only bomb I have on my property is the water well in my barn. He said, thousands of people have written us saying your water well was always contaminated. So I said, well, give me the evidence. With all my FOIPing I've done, I've never seen the evidence of that. Who was the man in power at the regulator at the time? Neil McCrank. I FOIPed for documents about myself under his power. He knew this was going on. Some of the documents even indicate that he directed this abuse of me. Shut me up. Make her go away. First of all, she's a woman. We don't let women talk in Alberta. Oh, the men have all the power here. So they had to bring in a couple female premiers to kind of pretend that they think women have some rights or have a voice. But look at what he did after. He was on a task force to review the boards that Notley's now doing, including his own. And Harper, Stephen Harper, appointed him to be on the advisory board for the council looking at national security. That's terrifying. And he's now a lawyer at a law firm in Calgary on energy matters. You've already seen this. My water. I lived with this. You hear from the health report that Andrew showed you, some of the comments and the thing that he said that struck me about run like hell. If your levels are above this many ppm in the house, I lived with a methane detector. A geologist colleague of mine said to me, Jess, you should not be living there. You could blow up any minute, and your visitors and your dogs. And so I had the methane detector. It went off a couple times. And then I was speaking to a geologist with the Geological Survey in Saskatchewan because I wanted to know what was burning my skin. And he said to me, methane detector, that's ridiculous. Because by the time it goes off, it's too late. If you cause any static, if it's wintertime and your dog's hair, your clothing, you turn on a light switch, you open the door, you'll blow. My water hits the front page of the Edmonton Journal. Did the regulator show up to do anything? No. They ought to have started monitoring our water years ago. They knew in 2001, 2004, EnCana had fracked our aquifers. So we had a press conference at the legislature, and we were promised there in the legislature, Guy Boutilier, Environment Minister, all affected citizens would get safe water, not just now, but into the future, regardless of whether it was natural methane or not. All methane's natural. What's not natural is the fracking and the drilling and the leaking and the lies and the gag orders. The 200 wells in the freshwater zones. I want to point out a couple things. This is where the water tower blew up, and that's my place. That's the hamlet of Rosebud. Groundwater flow. These ones here, these ones are super shallow. The 5 of 14's right there, right in groundwater flow to our place, to my place. Finally, after the press conference, the regulator shows up reluctantly to test my water. That's me. I'm taking duplicates because by this time I trust no authority in the province anymore. This is an industry I gave my entire career to. This is Leslie Miller. They sent a trainee. And Al Strauss, who was sampling my well as well, he blamed me for the methane contamination, saying, you don't have cattle here, do you? I said, no. He says, well, you're not using enough water, so you're at fault. That's the Alberta science. What do they call it here, the Alberta advantage? That's the Alberta science advantage. There's Leslie Miller at the lab with my water samples. 3 days later, we have an emergency meeting in Edmonton with Guy Boutilier, minister, Peter Watson, deputy minister, Bevier, assistant deputy minister, a government hydrogeologist, Rob George, and I am blamed for using too much water. Me and 2 little dogs, a few visitors, my nephew. The water contamination just destroyed my nephew. I couldn't believe how angry it made him and how it broke him. A horrific impact I had to live with how it changed him. He spent a lot of time with me. So Boutilier, he's sitting there at the front of the boardroom like the boss, huge position of power here, and I brought, of course, as a scientist, all my evidence, and I go to show him the evidence. And he, like a 5-year-old who doesn't want to brush his teeth, turns his body away from me, refused to look at the evidence. None of his staff would either. I made them write the EnCana report number, file number down. And to this day, they will not release to me the bacteriological testing on my water, the complete test results. Keep that in mind. Here we have the typical Alberta politicians. Guy Boutilier dancing with Danielle Smith after he crossed the floor. Peter Watson. After this emergency meeting and this minister refusing to look at the evidence, I was asked to do a number of speaking events across the province, and I told people, I tend to be honest. People need to know. I told them this ridiculous behavior by the Minister of Environment and his staff. And Peter Watson got on the phone and left me a message while I'm on tour. I think I was on my way to Pigeon Lake. You're not allowed to do that. You can't talk about stuff like this. You can't talk about these meetings. We pay these guys. You and I, we pay their salaries. We can't talk about their cover-up and their fraud. But they're used to silencing everybody. Blame nature fraud. After I went public with the law violations, the regulators and politicians told the public, oh no, it's the citizens' fault, it's the water wells' fault, it's nature's fault. Most of the water wells in Alberta are naturally contaminated with methane. Do you remember the historic data? Less than 1%. I made the government test the Hamlet water. They refused to initially. They knew as of April 2006 that the isotopic fingerprinting of the gases in our water wells and the gases from some of EnCana's shallow wells, those are the legals, those are EnCana wells, matched. Did they tell us? Did they tell the public? No. I had to fight for this like hell, and $1,500 and 2 years of fighting. I've never been a boxer, but it was more exhausting than I can imagine a boxing fight would be in the ring, trying to get the data we are entitled to publicly. Some of the chemicals found in our water, this is the Hamlet water. I'm not going to go through them all, but a lot of these are man-made. The chemicals in my water, this is regulator testing. The hexavalent chromium is used to stop water production. You heard a couple quotes about some of these problem wells and aquifers. You got an influx of water. EnCana fracked our aquifers. They had terrible water production problems. Hexavalent chromium is used to stop the water production. Chromium went up by a factor of 45 in my well. Did the regulator come back to properly determine or monitor this? No. Baseline testing fraud in Alberta. This is only required for coal bed methane wells in the freshwater zones. Not deep. Not the sand wells in the freshwater zones or the shales in the freshwater zones. I heard a lawyer here in your community, he couldn't even get a company to baseline test his water well. How's a farmer supposed to? How am I supposed to? Companies were previously testing, as in my case, a mile away, and for all depths of fracking. They know the contamination is happening. They have to cover it up. And even though those toxic chemicals were found in our water, red flag indicators of industry contamination, the BTEX, the metals, the heavier hydrocarbons, the petroleum distillates, naphthalene, they don't test for them. It's not mandatory. Canada-wide, there's no testing for the frac chemicals injected, or the drilling chemicals, or the servicing chemicals, or the acidizing, or the cementing. And 6 years later, frac focus fraud was created. I'll talk more about that later. Dissolved versus free gas. Just a very sneaky trick that the government did. And actually, there's been some documents that I have that looks like Quicksilver kind of directed how the baseline testing standard would be written. They don't test for how much gas is in your water. They only test to detect if it's there or not. So what happens if there is natural methane in your water at a low level, let's say 0.5 milligram per liter, they frack, and 2 months later you got a wet toilet seat like I had, where you can light your water on fire. They come and test, and there's 100 milligrams per liter in your water. You have no court case. You have no case, because they'll say, yeah, but we tested your water well. There was always methane there. Yeah, but how much? Oh, we didn't test for that. The dissolved testing is very important. The CAP study from the 90s, they used dissolved testing to quantify. Pennsylvania, everywhere else. Australia, they use dissolved testing. In Alberta, oh no. They don't want the data. Why? The data will prove the contamination. They want to frack us all. If people start to find out how bad this is, people will start saying no. People will stop calling me the crazy lady at Rosebud. Some landowners asked EnCana, look, we'll pay for it. If you do the testing, we'll pay for this test ourselves. EnCana refused, and brutally, nastily. I got into an incredible altercation with a trainee tester for EnCana, refusing to do the proper testing. Then you have the gas well problem versus the water well problem with the gases in those two things. They're only testing the water wells. If you don't test the gas wells, what are you going to match it to? After your water is contaminated, do you think the company is going to happily come to you like the Catholic Church does and say, we're sorry? And here's all our isotopic fingerprinting? No, no. The church treats their sexual abuse victims way better than the industry treats those of us that we get polluted in Alberta. Another position of power, big power in the Research Council, which later, they changed their names, right? Whenever one of these regulators gets caught breaking the law, EUB became ERCB, now it's the AER, it used to be ERCB. Who knows what they'll call it next? The Research Council became Alberta Innovates. At the time of all this, they were the Research Council, the president and CEO was John McDougall. This is a great diagram, I thought, of him, a sketch by Anthony Jenkins for the Globe and Mail. He was appointed without a Master's of Science or a PhD. Top science position in this province. And he wrote a briefing note that I obtained years later by Freedom of Information. This one cost me $4,150 or something like that, $125. And I worked 4 years. Massive. I don't even want to count the hours I spent. I don't get paid for what I'm doing. Plus another $1,000 in photocopying. And I got this document that he submitted to the Minister of Environment in Alberta and Ontario. Why Ontario? Well, they have a massive abandoned well problem there, massive sour gas migration into drinking water, massive gas migration problems. Indian Hills, they had a golf course a couple years ago erupting madly into geysers of methane contaminant sour gas, it sounded like, very quickly hushed up. So this briefing notes they're going to blame bacteria before they were retained and after the regulator already knew, they had already got the data proving EnCana guilty party. Landowners may not willingly accept the findings determined by Alberta Environment and Alberta Research Council. And even if they were going to blame methane made by bacteria, keep in mind, they are fracking so shallow. The most shallow fracks I found by EnCana at Rosebud were 100 meters below the surface. Wow. Another company more towards Hannah was fracking at 98 meters, by Gleason 80 meters. It's not just happening at Rosebud. Yeah. So they're fracking the methane that's made by bacteria. And then when we get bacteriological methane in our water, they blame us. Now, another position of power, Kevin Pilger. He was the lead investigator for our community-wide contamination at Rosebud. 20 years experience, that's him on the right, Debbie Signer beside him. Notice he has no surgical gloves on. That's a no-no. Notice also the bare spots. Her home was brand new. Her water well was only a couple years old. So the grass hadn't grown in yet. And I tell him about all the evidence I had collected. I'm not the regulator, I don't get paid. He refused to look at any of the evidence I had because he said, EnCana promised, just like they promised us in the open house, we're only going to frack deep. We're not going to look at the data. No, 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 EnCana's innocent, they're fine. So I told him, go to the regulator, get the data from them. No, Jess, we can't do that because you broke in and changed all the records. Me, a middle-aged woman with bad hands, my health being severely affected by the fumes I'm breathing in my home and the stress. But one of the beautiful impacts of fracking, the good, there's always a good side, right? One of them is that if you're an ordinary woman, you become Wonder Woman. And if you're an ordinary man, you become Superman. And you can scale the walls of the regulator, hide from all their security, and do what? 10 lifetimes, altering, whiting out EnCana's how many thousands of pages of records in one night? Yeah, I'm quite an amazing woman, but I'm not actually. I'm very ordinary. But this is how desperate they are to keep this from the public. So I told him to read the report. You saw the diagram twice now. Nope, we can't read that because you fabricated the whole thing. I said, but it's got yeah, the story gets better. You see those guys? 2 professional signatures, professional seal. No, I fabricated those too. Fiona Lordson was standing beside me. She was so horrified, she was about to faint. She had to leave and go sit in her kitchen. And it gets better. In New York and Michigan and Europe, I have to tell people what these are, but not here. Now we have a new technique. Now maybe John McDougall with the Research Council devised this technique. I cannot tell you who to credit this technique with. I have not obtained that via FOIP documents. But the first time I saw it used was Kevin Pilger, 20 years experience. He had tested Debbie's well a month prior to. No E. coli was found in her water. You know how they have to blame us with bacteria? They have to make us dirty. No E. coli. So then he comes along, and I'm there witnessing it. Some of the neighbors. I had been on a CBM tour of the Yukon. 7 elders came down. They were there. Just good timing. An investigative journalist, Tadzio Richards, was there. And I'm watching Kevin Pilger with his staff, resting his sampling canister and a rope. You're supposed to use a chain that you can sterilize, in and out of the mud around Debbie's well. It was a very hot, humid day in June. And I look closer, and there's mud and gopher shit. In and out of the well. He didn't just do it once. In and out and in and out. So I didn't say anything. I thought, well, surely he's gonna do something. So then I said to him, Kevin, you're contaminating that water well. You're sampling E. coli. He didn't say anything. I had to leave. And then he comes and drops in on my place a little while. He was quite a bully guy, eh? He always wanted to scare you. And he says, hey, Jess, well, you know, I realized that, yeah, so that wasn't good sampling. So we dumped all those samples and took new samples. But if you've contaminated a water well with bacteria, you have to flush the system. You have to shock chlorinate it again a couple times. Then you have to, you let it sit 3 days. You run out all the chlorine, not down the septic, but on your driveway or somewhere. And then you let it sit a few days. To this day, to my knowledge, they've never done that. So that is the Alberta Environment gopher shit sampling technique. This one fraudulent data collection on one citizen water well. We had the Jack water well, the Campbell's water well by Pinoca. We had Ancraft came later, but there were numerous water wells in my community, and the Zimmermans as well by Wetaskiwin. They discredited all of us by saying we were dirty. The Research Council even fraudulently said in their report on my case that I didn't maintain my well, which I did. And Pilger has moved on. He went to the regulator after he did that. He went to the Energy Regulator. And look at where he was. Compliance section lead and enforcement advisor. So what does he go teaching the oil and gas industry how to do the gopher shit technique? And for the people here in Cochrane, he's on your developmental appeal board. If fracking comes to your town, I bet you a case of beer that Pilger's going to say, yeah, frack them all. It's good for them. This is the methane in our water. Remember the historic on mine, gas present, no. The baseline level, risk of explosion, 1 milligram per liter. And CAP testified, I testified to this committee also. They said, oh, if we find methane in water, we presume it's naturally occurring. All methane is. He's not really lying. But he's leaving out a big part. The drilling, the fracking, the refracking, the fracking aquifers, the leaks. Monitoring fraud. The environment ministers said in 2002, we have to monitor, we have to do tracking of the contaminants. We know it's going to cause trouble. It's a quantity and quality. We had water wells in Rosebud go dry. It's one thing to have contaminated water, it's one thing to have no water. So they drilled 3 monitoring wells 6 years too late. Here's one of them, this lid. I went down to have a look because you can't trust anybody anymore. Kevin Pilger and a hydrogeologist from the Research Council with a water well driller did this. So I thought, oh boy, what did they do? I went and had a look. There was so much methane and ethane venting out of this water well that the handle was vibrating like crazy. They had no, this was Friday, they went home or to the bar, I don't know. No marker. There's a house right next door. Kids would bike here with dirt bikes and quads. They could have leveled the town. So we called 911, got horrifically bullied for doing so. See how close the house is? They had toddlers. But they knew they had a problem, they had to cap it. And true to Alberta Environment's cover up nature, they covered it up so that people wouldn't see it because I was talking about it. Then we have lab switch fraud. You remember the data from 2006? They knew EnCana was the guilty party from the fingerprinting data by Dr. Carlos Mullenbachs, the king at the U of A. What did they do? They switched to Dr. Bernard Meyer's lab at the U of C. he has the least accurate mass spec. Why did they do this? It's very sneaky. This is clever, but I don't think the regulator came up with this. I think EnCana helped them with this one. They didn't want to fingerprint the ethane because the ethane fingerprints are the most damning. We, of course, didn't trust anybody anymore. We took our own gas. We asked the regulator, give us duplicates, and we sent them to Carless. So we have a beautiful data set. Here we have the 2006. Here we have the 2007. And look at how close they match, 41 to 44. I'm not going to go explaining the isotopic fingerprinting, but they can get really accurate fingerprints of where the gas comes from. This is the regulator study from 2006. Matches exactly our ethane. Those are energy wells, not water wells. Here's EnCana's gas well fracked in the freshwater zone. They only sampled 1 out of 200 of those shallow ones. And again, microbial gas won't make ethane. Then we have the regulator and corporate sampling fraud. This is over and above the gopher shit technique. They don't collect the data from the law-violating wells, not even if they frack your aquifers. No purging of the water well properly. They don't collect enough water. Why do they do this? To avoid sampling the ethane, the propane, the butane, the pentane. Campbell's have methane, ethane, propane, butane, pentane. The fingerprints show deep source, industry source. Is the regulator helping them? No. They've been treated like horrific. They're ranchers. And man, it's one thing to treat me badly. I'm not a rancher or a farmer, but have they ever treated them terribly? So they can avoid also the concentration of gases in the water wells. You're supposed to sample the gases in the aquifer. You have to purge the well. The Signer case is fantastic because, as I said, the regulator's not that smart. They didn't really know what they were doing. They accidentally purged her well properly and found 3 times the methane in her water that they found in the rest of our water wells. They put filthy equipment down your wells. They don't clean it first. They don't use gloves. They don't wash their hands. They sample from the kitchen tap instead of the water well. This one's really nasty. Leslie Miller did this, and I watched others doing it. They open the vial for the methane test, the dissolved methane test, which is how to quantify the methane, and they leave the lid off for a long time. They add the preservative after. They let most of the methane and ethane escape. Fumble around. It's so obvious how deliberate it is. They let samples sit in the lab too long. And then they finally retained the Research Council. Conflict of interest. The Research Council was being paid by Alberta Environment and EnCana to study groundwater impacts from CBM, from coal bed methane. They were to review the investigation by Alberta Environment and determine what their conclusions were on this review. I filed my lawsuit in December of 2007 to sue the AER, Alberta Environment, and EnCana. And shortly thereafter, again, this took me until 2012 to get these records via FOIP. I had an official inquiry order these records released to me. Incredibly exhausting fight. But Alberta Environment's Steve Wallace secretly edited the independent reports that blamed nature and bacteria. He even edited the conclusions, not just on my water, Campbell's, Zimmerman's, Debbie Signer's, Lordson's, and mine. So back to John McDougall. Under his watch, a man of big power, a science man who's not a scientist, ignored the damning ethane data. Not only that, they altered the data that they did include in the reports. They fudged them. They ignored the historic record on my case, even though they included the historic record to look good in the appendix. But in their conclusions, they said, oh, no, it's natural because historically other water wells had methane in them. They ignore the 2003 test on my water, and that EnCana illegally fractured the aquifer that supplies my well. And instead of using the damming data I told you about a while ago, that they knew of since 2006, they ignored the fingerprinting data done on EnCana wells in Rosebud, and they used data on other energy wells 100 miles north, fracked much deeper, but they will not release that data to me. I'm pretty sure they weren't even on EnCana wells. John McDougall was part of this, and I have FOIP documents, I have lots of documents with him participating in this stuff. Violated the terms of a reference with Alberta Environment. They used EnCana records instead of records from Alberta Environment. They blamed bacteria and nature. The government breaks their promise. They take away the water. That's me over. Whoop. Did you see that? I'm stressed. I'm trying to use the water as a microphone. That's my truck there. That's magic. Even on the hottest days, I always asked if he wanted to come along. When he saw me rounding up all the bottles, he always wanted to come along. We're back home now. There's the water tower, the new one. When the original one blew up, it cost the community $700,000 to rebuild a new reservoir. And they put it under that building. They haven't fixed the aquifers. What if that blows? The water manager's office is in there. Kaboom. I lost my laundry room. We served the legal papers on the parties. W5 had a very short segment on my water on national news. And that was a Saturday night. Monday morning, I start getting harassment by Harper's anti-terrorist squad. I laughed. I said, I knew this was going to happen. Yeah, national news, here you are. And they lied. I caught them lying to me within an hour. They needed to hire me to help them talk to the landowners in Alberta because I had such a good relationship with all the harmed landowners I was helping for nothing because the regulators won't. My lawyers and I talked to them. We said, we will come to you. You pay Ernst's legal fees. We'll have her lawyers there. She'll come to Calgary, whatever you want. No, they wanted to come to my house. We all said no. She's a single woman living alone with 2 little dogs. She doesn't want 2 great big hulking men in her house. No. This is Thursday. Here they come. They are not very good drivers. It was winter. I watched them. I knew they were coming, right? I don't know why. I had my camera ready. I took pictures. And so I watched them, right? They drove too slow. So they come up the icy road. It's a rural trail, right? And they had to back up because they couldn't get, it's just a tiny little hill. They couldn't get up. Here they are in my driveway. I always like this picture because it makes me think of him going for his pistol. That's my house. This is my home. Our homes are our sanctuary. How dare they? I was really scared. I took pictures. And when they got to my top of my step, this guy, he says, DeFranceschi, he says, oh, we're undercover. You can't take pictures of us. I said, yeah, and you're trespassing. And if they're undercover, Harper should give them white fuzzies to wear in the winter. So who abused this power? Say that louder, please. Can I repeat that? I heard someone in the front row say, what an asshole. A nasty, nasty prime minister. He harmed my lawsuit big time. I can't prove it, but boy, oh boy. So who abused the power here? This was his anti-terrorist squad. Did he direct them? Did John McDougall direct them in EnCana? Who did this? And if the water contamination is natural, would they spend your tax dollars sending an anti-terrorist squad? 43 members they hired for this squad. Then we have changing history fraud. I keep checking the data. This is on the water well database, partly Alberta Environments. I go to look for my records that say gas present no. Don't worry, I always back everything up. I have PDFs of everything I ever looked at, and backed up and triple backed up. And I couldn't believe it. I see the records have gone from 1-page record to 2 pages, and the gas present no has been changed with a blank. Again, under McDougall's watch, scientists supposedly of high power, fraud, he allowed secret editing, including the conclusions, cover-up of life. This is not just contaminated water that will maybe give you a rash or give you the flu every once in a while, or maybe give you bronchitis. This can kill you and your loved ones. He violated the FOIP law. I tried to get some of my money back because they withheld the records, they delayed. They were supposed to give it to me in 30 days. They took years. And I wrote a really nice letter saying, I request a fee waiver. I've asked the FOIP coordinator. She didn't write me back. John McDougall did. I got the head honcho to deal with my fee waiver request. And he gave me all this legal baloney that wasn't true. So I got finally an official inquiry, and she put these in her final report, the adjudicator, not me. He overcharged me almost $4,000. And she put right in her report, this looked like it was to punish her for asking for these records. Is that for me? They ordered records released. I'm still waiting for the public water well testing records. I'm still waiting for the bacteria testing on my water. Now, was this a reward by Stephen Harper? This man was promoted to the top science position in the country, National Research Council. When I was a kid, nobody said the word environment. I was going to study science and do something for the environment because they were polluting the river where I grew up. I dreamed of having this job. Well, the interesting thing I noticed last year, after Slickwater was published, he suddenly, abruptly, did a leave of absence, unexplained. He was in the middle of actually de-sciencing the Research Council to turn it into an industry tool, and he never went back. More deregulation. In 2011, the regulator removed all the limits for unconventional oil and gas in Alberta. They can do anything. They can frack anywhere up here, and they are. And they don't have to test your water. They promise us they only frack here and frack here for the coals, but in my community, they fracked here. I'm going to get into some legal stuff. So a short little summary on Harper. He created the anti-terrorist squad that harassed me. He appointed a judge named Justice Veltois to the Court of Queen's Bench. He appointed two Chief Justice, Neil Wittmann. He sort of took him from the Court of Appeal and promoted him down. He then promoted Justice Veltois up, and he appointed 7 out of 9 of the Supreme Court justices that heard my case against the AER. This is his idea, the perfect judiciary. I wished I had that talent. I wished I had done that cartoon. I love this cartoon. First court hearing, Justice Barbara Veltois is the judge, and she offers case management. I was naive. I thought I would at least be treated reasonably in the system. I never expected to get anywhere because it's too big. It's billions of dollars of liabilities here. I'm just one little tiny woman. I never thought I'd get very far. But I thought I'd be treated with respect in the courts. I didn't know case management is just to make sure your case never gets anywhere. Because if you get a bad judge, you're stuck with that judge. Normally, you get all kinds of different judges, right? You might get a good one, you might get a bad one. And she asks for a shorter statement of claim. We agreed to that. I didn't want to be unreasonable. I wanted the case to move forward. It delayed my case a year, cost me a massive amount of money. And 2 years later in the Court of Appeal, the judges complained because my statement of claim was too short. Case management call. The defendants want to move my case to Calgary. Lawsuits are supposed to be held where the harms took place. In my case, that's the Drumheller Courthouse, a rural courthouse. Some of you are comfortable with the city. I'm not. Every time I go to Edmonton, I do around and around the circle because I get lost with all those bridges and the traffic in the city. I'm a country girl. Meadowlarks I can live with. Taking my case out of the rural legal environment and putting it into the city would ensure people wouldn't show up to support the case. But it kind of backfired on them, but I'll get to that later. And they actually said in this call, I have transcripts, that moving the case to Calgary would be in the favor of the defendants. Veltois said, the Chief Justice says, no, it has to be in Drumheller. EnCana whines, and EnCana says, oh, we're not driving to Drumheller. Look at all the hundreds of frack trucks. 45 million gallons of fluid. How many vehicles do you need to move that? And they can't drive an hour and a half to a court hearing? So they moved the case to Calgary. Frack Focus came in, January 1, 2013. It's bogus, it's fraud. So many reasons. It's industry created, controlled, trade secrets are allowed. They post the data only 30 days after the frack. There's no way you can protect your water before. You don't know what to test for. It's too late. The most important chemicals, the drilling, acidizing, cementing, perforating, servicing, none of those are disclosed. And we, the public, are part of this problem because most people only ask for frack chemicals to be disclosed. You have to ask for all chemicals to be disclosed. There's a new paper just came out last month, a fantastic paper. They've now peer-reviewed and published a study showing that the other chemicals are just as bad, if not worse, than frack chemicals. And zero disclosure for all the wells that contaminated our water, all the ones before January 1, 2013. Second court hearing in Calgary. I wake up early in the morning. Now, EnCana says they won't drive to Drumheller. Rosebud is 20 minutes closer to Calgary, and yet look at this. They got a drilling crew here, a rig. Whatever they were doing, perfing, I'm not sure. EnCana will not drive to a courthouse. The Calgary courthouse, I found out later, was packed. I believe in taking a stand. Andrew, thank you for that incredible quote that you read out of that little book. Very powerful. I really believe in taking a stand. I'm not a protester. I'm too shy. I do not do public speaking. I get sick for weeks before and even sicker for weeks after. So I asked a witness, a PhD in science, too bad she's not the head of the National Research Council, to witness with me. I attended my entire court hearing in the waiting room of the Drumheller Courthouse, where the case belongs. It cost me a fortune to pay for the hearing in Calgary. I could not, in good conscience, go to where the lawsuit should not be. And in the hearing in Calgary, the regulator says, oh, she's a terrorist, we can violate her rights, we owe no duty of care to you or you or you or you or your water or me. Legally immune for everything, gross negligence, acts in bad faith, you name it. Alberta Environment, the water protector, imagine this, they wanted the word contamination removed from my lawsuit. They wanted all the other contaminated water wells, all mention of the other wells that were contaminated, removed. And then Harper comes along and yanks Barbara Veltois after she heard my case, promotes her. My lawyers told me, don't worry, Jess, whenever that happens, the judges will write their ruling on cases they heard. They finished their caseload. So they asked her in the next case management phone call, and she says, oh, no, that's not an option. Why am I being treated so differently? Not just by the regulator in all matters, but by the courts. More deregulation. EnCana's VP, Gerard Prati. The government appoints him chair of the regulator. We have a stacked deck there now. We have Prati and Mark Taylor. More deregulation. Responsible Energy Development Act. Responsible, sure. Let's remove the public interest from the mandate of the regulator. No public health, and yet they come around and write disgusting health reports. They did one for the people harmed here in the Loch End. They did it for Diana Downheimer up at Didsbury. They don't have no health experts. You can't do that. You can't, as any other kind of scientist, you can't talk about health matters in a report. They've done no health studies. They have no health mandate, no impact assessments. I'm still hauling water. It's getting harder and harder for me to load the tank in my truck. And 8 months later, Justice Neil Wittmann, when they took my judge away, he volunteered to take over, and he ruled on a hearing he did not hear. Justice Wild Wild West style. But he waited 8 months. The Canadian Judicial Council came out with a report recommending court rulings to be released within 6. They've been horrifically long in my case. He says there's no evidence she's a terrorist, but he gives the regulator total legal immunity even for violating the Charter, which is Canada's top law in the land. He says in his ruling, I have a valid Charter claim, but he says to prevent you and you and you from suing the regulator for violating your Charter rights, he's going to rule against me. Can't have you dressing up in your Charter clothes. Now, do you guys remember how often Harper publicly smeared the Charter? This man did not like our Charter. I think my case was used to destroy Canada's Charter of Rights and Freedoms, which kills me inside. I'm taking a stand to do what I think is right, and I am destroying one of the things that I most love about this country. Our Charter has been copied by so many countries in the world. You have no idea how important that Charter is to us. My contamination stays in my statement of claim. I get to sue the taxpayer-funded Alberta Environment. I can't sue the industry-funded regulator. EnCana filed nothing, argued nothing. One of the compliance managers, Craig Nouse, who was on our case, when asked about people harmed by fracking, "These people will get nowhere," he gleefully said. Wittmann, Justice Wittmann, gives Alberta Environment a third chance to throw my case out. This really made me angry, cost me a lot of money and another year. But the good that came out of it was that the counsel for Alberta Environment said, "You have to throw her case out, Your Honor. There could be millions or billions of damages more to come." Harper appoints Peter Watson to chair the National Energy Board. This is the energy regulator across the country. He bullied me. He tried to intimidate me into silence. He engaged in fraud to cover up life-threatening drinking water contamination. Confession by the Canadian Association of Petroleum Producers, published in the Calgary Herald in 2014. Yeah, CBM fracking did occasionally contaminate water. In some of the more infamous cases, are you talking about mine? Zimmerman's? The landowners could light their water on fire. The fall of 2014, I took this to Court of Appeal. I lost. They uphold the regulator's immunity, industry funded. A month later, Justice Wittmann rules I can sue Alberta Environment, the taxpayer-funded regulator. That's you. So I file leave to the Supreme Court of Canada. Notley wins the election, the NDP. Alberta Environment was found illegally shredding, not the politicians, this was the water regulator, illegally shredding 344 boxes of executive records, including related to my water well. Including related to litigation, likely about my case, because how many people are suing Alberta Environment in Alberta? Here are the justices that heard my case, January 2016. I did not go, because this lawsuit is destroying me physically. The stress is unbearable. I could not at that time cope with the travel or the expenses. I know I would have fainted in that room. And one of the worst things, I'm doing this lawsuit not for my water well. I would never enter Canada's legal system. It's horrific, it's nasty, it's mean, it's abusive. I would never do it for my water well. I'm doing it because they're harming so many people. And people's lives are at risk. But one of the things that's really hard on me is not everybody, most people want me to fix everything. Fix their contaminated water, fix their problems, fix the bad way the regulators are treating them. There's only so much I can carry. And I am worn out. The Accords group, I didn't say thank you to anybody. Andrews covered it, right? But Accords on their poster said, tireless campaigner. Well, maybe I used to be, but not anymore. I'm so exhausted. I did not know how I would stand today. I've got my tummy leaning on the podium. Justice Abella was interviewed a few months later. She was the justice in Canada I most had respect for and admired. Incredible woman from what I thought then. And this question was published that she postured. If justice is the application of law to life, but some are denied access, what's the point? This is her here. That is so important, I'm going to read it again. If justice is the application of law to life, but some are denied access, what's the point? And in May, Justice Wittmann, he ruled against us and against the environment for Redwater. In the Redwater case, for the banks. But his ruling was very interesting because in that ruling he said the federal bankruptcy law trumps Alberta's law. In his ruling on my case, he said, oh, no. The Alberta law trumps the Charter, which is Canada's top federal law. I was invited to present in Montreal last November, not the conference Andrew was talking about. This was different. This was the consulate of Venezuela put this on. And the ambassador had this in his invitation letter. We recognize fracking is one of the most serious environmental problems facing humanity today. I was far too tired to go, but I went because of that quote. The waiting is deadly. Absolutely deadly. The Supreme Court process was 2 years and 2 months, cost me a fortune, Lots of incredibly gracious Canadians donated generously for this process. 2 years and 2 months, and this was not on a trial. This was just on a preliminary motion. My lawyers were sure we were going to win because the Charter trumps all laws in Canada. They took a year and a day. The council recommends 6 months. I knew they weren't going to rule until probably 6, 7, 8 months, but the next 4 months, I just watched the life sap out of me every day. And I watched all the other cases. I was the first case heard in the winter session of 2016 by the Supreme Court. And they ruled on all the other cases long before they ruled on mine. Why? What took them so long? Were they punishing me because I have publicly said I will not gag and settle? The Canadian legal system pushes all civil plaintiffs, like in cases like mine, to gag and settle. They do not want us in the system. The legal system in Canada is for the rich and corrupt politicians. They don't want us in there. So they have the gag and settlement process that the courts endorse. I got a letter from one of the justices saying, if case management is no longer needed or the case settles, they push it on us. I think the waiting is part of let's kill her so she settles. But I tell you this, over my body, my dead body, I will die before I sign a gag order. So then they... Thank you. I have also publicly stated that gag orders need to be made illegal for situations like this. If you're in a car accident and you have health situation, your children might have complications, that's different. You can have a gag order with that because that only harms you and your children and your vehicle. Groundwater moves. I have no right to gag the contamination in my water well. It goes to the next community. In fact, Glenn Solomon, the lawyer for the AER in my case, he was taped on the son of Anne Craft trying to get legal representation. He was taped. He said, oh, yeah, no. She's doing World War III. People usually settle. We give, they come, we say, oh, well, we spent so much money. We made so many millions. What's it going to cost us? A little extra. We give you the money. You sign here. You shut up. Why? So we can go down the street and do it again and again and again. So they ruled against me, 4-1-4. 4 justices said, no, she can't sue the regulator. The government can sometimes legislate themselves above the charter. My lawyers were horrified. 1 justice, Justice Abella, she's not sure yet. Imagine that, I spent all this time and money, and the Canadians who donated, she's not sure yet. And the other 4 said, yes, she can sue. Yes, she should sue. So I really have a non-ruling. But my valid charter claim, I can do nothing with it because the majority ruled. Justice Abella threw my case out on a technicality. Damaging the charter, Dean Lorne, this is a tongue twister, Dean Lorne Sosin, he's the Dean of Osgoode Hall, one of the most prestigious law schools in Canada, in Ontario. He wrote a scathing review on the ruling and basically said all 9 of the justices were wrong in how they ruled. You can Google it online. It's an incredible read. Most legal stuff I can't read because lawyers, they don't want us to be able to understand their stuff. So they put this legal mumbo jumbo and make it impossible to understand. His is very easy to understand. That wasn't enough. This is Justice Rosalie Abella again. She's got red mittens with white Canadian flags. She's been awarded so many things. She's been given an honorary degree at Yale. And in her ruling, she fabricated facts. She names me a vexatious litigant, which is a terrible thing to be if you are a litigant. You lose all credibility. You can be denied access to the courts or restricted. And she attributes this to the regulator, but I have a documented letter. My lawsuit revolves around the fact that the regulator judged me a criminal without due process, without any evidence, and the Supreme Court of Canada did the exact same thing to me. I'm just a little ordinary Canadian woman. Why did they have to go to such lengths? And then a few days after the ruling came out, Justice Wittmann announces his retirement. Did he fulfill Harper's orders? Get rid of me, squash me, have me defamed, discredit me? The world has been watching my lawsuit. I didn't start out to have that happen, it just happened. And many people studying and working for human rights and legal community were watching my case. They probably don't anymore. I'm now on my third case management judge, and he was picked by the court from a list of preferred judges by EnCana and Alberta Environment. So I filed a complaint in January with the Judicial Council about Alberta's conduct. I told them, I already lost. I lost cleanly. Do I now need to carry this burden the rest of my life and be defamed? And what if this ruling of calling me a vexatious litigant harms the rest of my lawsuit? I'm still suing Alberta Environment and EnCana. Any member of the public can complain, as long as it's about judicial conduct, about a federally appointed judge, made in writing. Most complaints come from the general public. Every complaint is considered seriously. No lawyers needed, no deadline, no fee. Lexon, did you guys read about this in the papers? They're suing the AER for $200 million. What about the immunity clause? As of today, I checked my mail. No letter yet from the Judicial Council saying whether they will conduct an inquiry or a review or not into Alberta's conduct. I'm one tiny flea. This is my favorite proverb. It's a Japanese saying. Many fleas make big dog move. You ever seen a dog move bitten with fleas? They move. And they move far. It doesn't do them any good, but they do move. I can't carry this alone anymore. People have to start sacrificing. People have to start standing up. People have to start doing. Yes, you will be ridiculed. Yes, you will be attacked. Yes, I get people. I don't even tell the press anymore where I will be when a ruling comes out because I've had so many people threaten me and show up at my place after a judgment's out in the paper. If a whole bunch of people start taking a stand, things will change. They think they can silence me. My water is too dangerous to flush toilets with. It's disconnected. I use a pail. This is Canada. We're supposed to have the most fresh water in the world, right? It's expensive to haul water. I go 45 minutes one way with one little dog. I have another little dog because Magic died. Here's Jem. She's a Jack Russell. She's great. She's old, though, too. She's almost 14. She's pretty worn out, and I compost outside, and then I use that around the trees. Still hauling water. When you are fracked, there's no aftercare. None. When you are flooded or there's look at how much help the people in Fort McMurray got. Look at how much help, how many military went to Quebec. Did you see all the pictures of people being boated out by all kinds of officials in the military helping people? No military from Suffield or Wainwright has come to my place with a tank full of water. Nobody has, actually. Oh, I had some bottles of water brought to me. Some women came visiting via Medicine Hat, and I couldn't believe it. They came out of their car with a 3-gallon jug of water. It's pretty cool, but very few people have done that. One other Albertan did that, too. Sometimes she shows up to court hearings and says, Jess, I got water for you in the truck, so after the hearing, we'll give you some bottles of water to take home. The judges have never come and given me water. Chevron has the gall to want, I'm almost done, to frack under Fox Creek. Sour gas country. They have a sour gas pipeline that runs through town. They have had a lot of frack quakes, proven, peer-reviewed papers. The fracking has been proven to cause these world record. The 4.8 is world record frack quake. They apparently violated Guide 56 because they put on their website that they already had approval, but they didn't tell the community. The community found out. Barb Ryan has just been incredible tracking the earthquakes up there and watching the companies. They called Chevron on this. Chevron, I saw both. They quickly changed their website, just like EnCana did. They consulted after the fact. They don't want you to know. But what's interesting up there, these are the laterals. So here's the town. They're going to frack right under the town. They held a poll after the open house. It just happened a couple days ago. This is rural Alberta. You do not need to be afraid to stand up and say no. You do not need to be afraid to yell no anymore in Alberta. The majority of the people leaving who were residents, when asked, Should this well go forward? They said no. I was astounded to read these stats. This is from Barb Ryan's Facebook page. Very simple word, very powerful. Thank you very much. This is Fox Creek. Fox Creek's down here, northwest of Fox Creek. They're fracking it to bits. Thank you.